Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Tom's work and the Centre for Study of Armed Conflict in Society on this great gathering of people. I think the contribution from the presenters but also from the audience has been outstanding, and I think there's many things that we can bring into the trained force from this forum. Ethics defined as the moral principles that govern a person's behaviour. It's very simple, easy to understand for soldiers' definition that I'll use today. Military leadership is designed to blend and harmonise the three key philosophies for ethics. That's Aristotle's virtues, with Kant's moral duty, and the utilitarianism of enabling the greatest good for the greatest number. And the Sergeant Major of Special Operations Command talked about the importance of leadership. The Fundamentals of Land Power 2014 requires Army to ensure the ethical application of land combat power. And the challenge for leaders is this harmonisation and blending of ethics for practical, actionable application on the ground for commanders and people facing the complexity of combat. Complexity is Clausewitz summarised, and he's had a pretty good run over the last couple of days. Every war is rich in unique episodes. Each is an uncharted sea full of reefs. The military profession faces a multitude of complex challenges, ethical behaviour included. Ethics must hold firm every second of every day for our people, in and out of uniform. Therefore, we need to give our people an ethical foundation. The foundations of ethics for a soldier or someone in the Australian Defence Force who simultaneously faces the chance, friction and uncertainty of enemy action, adverse weather, complex terrain, poor coordination, insufficient and inaccurate information and human error, requires us to enhance our people's ability to make ethical choices in all these complex situations to solve problems of tactics, strategy, logistics, technology, command and control, fires and human interactions. And the idea of human interactions was well touched on by Colonel Ian Langford when he talked about war as a human endeavour. Therefore, the military ethical framework must be easily understood and well drilled, well rehearsed and well practised by our people. We must emphasise our ethics in our words and in our deeds. And ethics must be practical. As a parent imbues ethical behaviour in their children, so the ADF must provide an ethical framework for our people. Fortunately, the ADF, the Australian Public Service, and all services have simple to remember and ethically appropriate values that we employ to provide our people a framework for their ethical behaviour. The Army values, as has been touched on by Tom McDermott yesterday and Dr Matthew Beard, the Army values are courage, initiative, the recently inserted after the Jedi Council episode, respect and teamwork. The Army's aim is that even under the most arduous conditions, when a person is cold, hungry, scared, uncertain, that ethical behaviour or their moral compass delivers and ensures appropriate behaviour to the circumstances. Courage, which was mentioned by Tom McDermott, Ian Langford and Matthew Beard, means in the Australian context, every Australian soldier demonstrates physical and moral courage. Our soldiers do what is fair and right in all circumstances. Initiative, every Australian soldier is committed to continuous learning, development and improvement. Respect, every Australian soldier respects the law of the land and is capable of restraint and prudence in the application of appropriate sanctioned violence. Teamwork, every soldier is part of the Army's team of teams. We rely on our mates. The ADF's 3 service recruit schools the Australian Defence Force Academy, of which we're here today, the Single Service Officer Training Colleges provide a foundation on which to build the training and education of our people. This includes ethics. Once these people are in the trained force, the Australian Defence Force people require continuous self and prescribed education in the military art. This includes importantly ethics to ensure their robust contribution to the chance, friction and uncertainty of war. In practical sense, in the 3rd Brigade, we have our Army training levels and standards that we apply throughout the force generation cycle. We have professional education and development, but we have enhanced that process with our human performance framework. And that human performance framework has 3 pillars. Families, are represented by the Geckos Family Centre, which has been in Townsville for about a decade. Our wounded, injured and ill, which is an immutable part of our responsibilities as leaders, and that's demonstrated in physical terms by the Soldier Recovery Centre. And then the new area that we are moving into to have the 3rd pillar of our human performance, the VASIA Resilience Centre. And that is to build the cognitive, physical, emotional, spiritual and ethical aspects of our soldiers to give them more than they can get through their training and the training we give them when they first join the Army or when we develop them once they're in the trained force. This type of human performance framework allows us to explore other areas of interest which we can help develop our soldiers. For example, 3 Brigade have developed, in conjunction with the community, a domestic violence framework. As you're aware, 1 in 6 women experience domestic violence, 1 in 20 men. We know our trained force has people who are either affected or perhaps, in the worst case, perpetrators. The key part of this work, which connects us with the human performance framework, is our connection with the Townsville community. In Townsville, 25% of that city, of 180,000 people, is either serving ADF family, a veteran from the Second World War through to the modern conflicts, or a family of veterans, about 42,000 people. The community offers us different facets on our ethical understanding. And as Tom Frayne said yesterday, as the Australian society liberalises, the ADF liberalises in conjunction with that change. In Townsville, the Mayor of Townsville is a former Army Reserve officer, Jenny Hill. She has proposed in her recent election a Defence Community Accord, which is a program that the UK have used for many years, and we're going to pilot that in Townsville, which is essentially a partnership between Defence and the community of living together, working, support, caring, contributing and thriving as an integrated community. This sort of work allows us to understand wider ethical implications for our people on a day-to-day basis, but also importantly gives our soldiers the support they need when they deploy on operations, particularly for the families. Supporting the Defence Community Accord will be a Defence Community Panel or Forum in which we can discuss key issues for our soldiers, so we can blend the support for our soldiers while they're serving, but also as they transition to other forms of service beyond defence. For example, we'll talk about the care of their soldiers that go through their medical employment classification process, domestic violence and suicide prevention. The Defence Community Panel allows the community to work with the ADF for us to learn mutually and share our ethical understandings to make us a stronger, more powerful force. This is not designed to be one way. The community and the ADF working together with each of us reciprocating to assist each other. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, I'd now invite Tara Goodman from the Red Cross, if she'd join our panel group over here. for a conversation. But as she's coming down, let me ask a question first of all of Paul. When someone's done the wrong thing ethically, is it always going to end up... Please sit down. Not royalty.
Get nervous.
Does it always end up, do you think, in a disciplinary matter or in illegality? Do you see kind of ethics as, well, it's ethically kind of not good, but it's not illegal, but then or not a disciplinary issue, but then it becomes a disciplinary issue, then a legal issue? Do you sort of see it as on a slide?
From a RSM point of view, yes, I do. It's when people, like step off the reservation and do something wrong, something that's not in line with service within the Australian Army, then they'll feel the full weight of the DFDA, Defence Force Discipline Act.
But what happens if a soldier, for instance, you've got two soldiers and you know that one soldier is sleeping with another soldier's girlfriend, but the first soldier doesn't know that? And this has kind of arisen because you've tried to inculcate into these people the importance of trust and truth and things like that. Are you able to intervene? And if you don't, is that then going to become the basis for a slide of deception and perhaps other betrayal in the unit?
Well, I know from my experience in the US context, if you're married and you have an affair in the US context and you've got rank, it's not good for your career. Not so much the case in the Australian context. It could be, but would I comment on an individual, two soldiers, if I knew that? Would I? Not really, because I'm there for the military effect. So I'll be concentrating on the outcome from a military perspective. I wouldn't want to be getting too involved as a senior soldier in the nitty-gritty of a human, soldier's, personal.
So one guy finds out that the other guy's doing this.
Well, then I could get involved. If it's affecting the capability of my organisation, then I'd be obliged to get involved then. But if it's not affecting the operational outcome or the capability of my unit, or my requirements, or my accountabilities, then I wouldn't.
So it could be a little bit blurred between personal and professional.
It's a very blurry question. It is a good question. I'll sit on the fence on that one.
Okay. So let me ask the Brigadier. You talked about the importance of holding people to account. Have there been instances where you felt obliged to hold someone perhaps more senior to you to account, and why did you feel uncomfortable in doing that?
I think the Australian Army encourages us to hold everyone to account, sideways people working for us and people we work for. I think the best way to work with anybody is in partnership rather than this strict holding to account. When we deal with our senior people and people deal with me, we both know what we want, and we want a decision. And so we try and spend the time before we ask the question, to make sure that we understand exactly what we want, what's reasonable. But if it is a difficult situation, at least have the conversation with the person you work for to say, this is really where we want to go. You need to make a decision. There is some risk for you, but we understand these are the implications of what we want to do. And while you take the risk, we have done as much work as possible for you to make sure that the risks won't eventuate. And I think that just is a sign of a well-trained, well-drilled organisation, an organisation that has open and honest communications with each other.
So the Brigadier's given a talk to all the troops about not taking kickbacks from defence suppliers, and that night, the Brigadier's going out to watch the football in a corporate box.
Yep, that's why I do follow the General Slater mantra of never accept corporate largesse.
So it does come at a cost to you though, doesn't it? When you do those things, you think, look, I'd like to go in the corporate box, it'd be great, but your principle is, I suppose I'm just wanting to explore, is that never put yourself in a position, you're saying, where you could be accused of a double standard, because are a lot of the ethical issues you see matters of hypocrisy?
Definitely don't put yourself in a situation, but I think that's in life as well as work, and I think that saying no to corporate largesse is not hard, because we're all busy and it's just another night out. So for me, it's an easy, simple thing to do. But it's also, you're right. The soldiers are smart enough to know what you're doing and to hold you to account if you're not showing appropriate behaviours.
And Tara, your work in the Red Cross, how do you hold people ethically to account if your mandate, though, is actually focused on law? Can you help us understand how that works?
Sure, yeah. Well, so my program within Red Cross is the International Humanitarian Law Program, but more largely, the whole Red Cross, Red Crescent movement has as its touchstone the fundamental principles. So the 7 fundamental principles of Red Cross is something that all employees have to sign on to and give undertakings to have regard to. And 4 of them were discussed yesterday by Beth, that humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, and then they apply to all humanitarian operators. And then Red Cross additionally has volunteerism, unity and universality. And so they've all got special sort of meanings for the organisation and not quite necessarily your dictionary meanings. But essentially, if someone isn't complying with the spirit of those principles, then they are, that's discussed with them. And sometimes there are ethical challenges for them. I mean, impartiality means we treat people only according to need. Now, in a particular place, you may have geographical restrictions. It may be that an area is predominantly one ethnic group over another. There's things you can't control there, and there are sort of ethical dilemmas that we have to discuss and work through. But essentially, those core principles, which last year celebrated their 50th anniversary, so these have been adopted by Red Cross, Red Crescent societies and movement, I should say, worldwide for 50 years, and they are the guiding principles by which we operate. So it's about, we don't have disciplinary acts, we don't have disciplinary procedures. There's challenges in countries where Red Cross societies might be closely aligned with governments, and in those cases there are systems for discussing them with them, but it's something where it's better to have a Red Cross society in some cases, or Red Crescent, that we can work with and that we can improve upon than having none whatsoever. So there are processes in place at a overarching level, which is the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, and at ICRC level for discussing with national societies how they, as a unit, comply. Sorry, that's probably an overly long answer to your question.
No. And would you like to put a question to either of your panellists before I maybe throw a little more open?
Yeah. Sorry, as you see, I've been sort of sprung on this role. I didn't, in the absence of another speaker. But look, I think from an international humanitarian law perspective, the ethics that we're interested in are the ones that apply only in armed conflict. I mean, the other stuff that you're talking about, and I'm really grateful for your definition of ethics, which we hadn't really had so far until you really pinpointed it now, applies both to people's moral behaviours outside conflict, and from a Red Cross perspective, what we're interested in is behaviours in war. So as you guys are fully aware, the Red Cross, which founded in 1863, was the inspiration for the Geneva Conventions the following year. So the 5 Swiss guys who started I'll try my French, Comité International au Secours des Blessés Militaires, which is
That's it, come on.
Thanks, not bad. And I've been practising for some years. And was an international society to help wounded soldiers. So those 5 guys started that in Switzerland, and then the idea followed the next year that we need an international law, so thus the Geneva Conventions the next year. And in the Geneva Conventions, as you know, Red Cross has a special role to play in armed conflict, and that involves being able to visit people in detention and advocating on their behalf. We also have a role in connecting people with families, tracing families. We have a role in terms of communicating the principles of IHL to warring parties. And so that role continues today. And then some years later, after the war to end all wars, the Great War, it was decided, well, since there weren't going to be any major wars anymore, what we really needed to concentrate on was emergencies and disasters. So national societies were born. So Red Cross, Australian Red Cross, who I work for, is a national society. Every country in the world where you will visit and where you may gauge has a Red Cross or Red Crescent society, and they are the people. It's a volunteer organisation. It's a private institution with a public mandate, and it's recognised by the government of the country in which it operates. So we have a legislative framework. So we are recognised in Australia by a royal charter that acknowledges that we are independent of government, but that we are stand ready and willing to act as auxiliaries to government in the humanitarian field. And every society, whether that's a Red Crescent or Red Cross, has that legislative act in the country that they operate in. There are 4 countries in the world that don't have a Red Cross, Red Crescent, so I don't think you'll be operating in Holy See, Bhutan, Oman, who knows, Nauru is the 4th one that doesn't have a Red Cross society at this stage. So every other country has one, and they are all based on, volunteer service. And in Syria, where many of you have been, it's the Red Cross National Society, not an international group of Red Cross do-gooders coming in, but the Red Cross National Society, so people like me who are Syrians, who deliver 85% of the aid, which is 80% of the aid supplied by the UN, so internationally. And they're there on the ground, they can cross borders, they've got the language, they're not foreign faces coming in who are figuring out how to operate, they are the locals. So I guess our real interest is in compliance with Geneva Conventions, essentially, and I was really interested to hear that in war, that is the sort of ethical framework that a lot of people have, and I just wanted to draw your attention to the Red Cross's relationship with the Geneva Conventions, and that we are there as sort of guardians of those conventions in a way, but we have a particular role. We're not an NGO, as was touched on yesterday, because we are private institutions with a public mandate. In Geneva, it's a private committee of, I don't know, was Natalia, correct me if I'm wrong, 12 people? Is she still there? No, she's around. My colleague from the ICRC. Can I see her? No. There she is, Natalia. What's the committee in Geneva? Is it 12 people? It's more. Okay, sorry. And I defer any question on the ICRC specifically to Natalia in the back row there. But that's our mandate, and so we're interested in your ethics as they apply in conflict, and we're interested to know how those are taught and how they're reinforced, and how the sticky questions get answered. And I think all of the issues about new technology that have come up, I think my answer is, well, the Geneva Conventions apply to all of these new technologies that we're dealing with. I don't think any of them pose any great challenge to the ethical framework that we have when it comes to mitigating the harm to civilians and mitigating the harshness of warfare, which is essentially what the Red Cross and Geneva Conventions aim to do, is to ensure that that warfare is as humane as it is able to be. And I think the overarching principle, which we haven't really discussed, that I think was coming out of it is humanity, and that's what the Geneva Conventions is about instilling a modicum of humanity in warfare. We totally respect the fact that you have to go out and engage kinetically and your job is to kill people. We make no comment about that, and that is legal, as you know, as long as you're killing combatants. And Red Cross makes no judgment whatsoever, and we make no judgment about the reasons for going to war. We don't look at that aspect at all. All we're interested in is what happens when people are hurt, and we don't mind who they are, whether they're your enemy, whether they're your colleague, whether they're a civilian. Our role is about getting assistance to those people. So, the ethical framework that we use is that international humanitarian law, and we share that with you, and we really welcome the dialogue about that. And I don't think that anything, as I said, sorry, don't mean to repeat myself, the interesting challenges that have come up today are not outside the scope of the Geneva Conventions in terms of new technologies and...
So the question is, what's been the experience of the other 2 panellists of the Red Cross? What feedback could you offer to Tara, whether the Red Cross gets in the way, whether it actually does what it says it does?
My experience is absolutely very positive. My young experience in East Timor, dealing with the Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, they provided a capability that didn't reside within the army at that time. We were dealing with issues that it was like screwing a light bulb into a room and you're getting more light, and issues we're presenting that we'd had no training for.
And how did they hold you to account?
They didn't really hold us to account. They complemented the effects of the Australian Army. When I was at Maliana on the border there, Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, they provided a capability that we just didn't have, and it was complementary. So my experience is extremely positive.
I agree. The complementary effect, the great advantage, as Tara said, is the fact that many of these organisations are local, so that provides some real glue to whatever operation we're trying to run. Now, I know that NGOs don't like to be included in the operational framework, but in terms of mapping the battle space or mapping the environment, it is important to understand where they go. And I think we have now a generation of people that at all sorts of levels have command on operations who do understand the fundamental complexity of the environment, which includes not only the combatants, our forces, coalition partners, but also organisations such as the Red Cross, but all the other NGOs that you might find in the battle space. And I think that people are very comfortable with how complex it is. And as the Sergeant Major said, the exercise Hamel, which is on now, basically does reflect as much as we can that complexity by throwing issues to commanders. And the idea of Hamel actually is that you will fail. As the first brigadier in the box now, Brigadier Ben James, it's just when you fail, and a lot of it is it doesn't matter, the cliche, it doesn't matter what happens in life, it's how you respond. It's actually how you respond to that failure. So the failure will be through a lot of internally displaced people turning up at Kultana, being internally displaced, or other things which are designed to test our systems, because we believe that the best way to learn is to learn through failure and to learn in an environment where we can actually share each other's lessons and grow stronger.
Have you ever been frustrated, though, as a commander, that we've been held to account, or we hold ourselves to account, but our operating partners have no such constraints? And have you ever thought, why doesn't the Red Cross do something about these people? Everyone has caveats. So I know that the NATO in Afghanistan, the United States will say NATO. These NATO partners have these caveats, but it's not that long ago that in Bosnia, the United States had big caveats, and there was actually the other way was a discussion about the United States having too many caveats. So everyone has caveats. It's sort of like when you exercise in our training areas, someone will do something, like go outside the range boundary, or they'll move on a road you're not supposed to ride, or something. They'll do something. My response is, that's war. So war's not fair, and people will do things that are not right. As long as we are ethical in our application of the rules of engagement, orders for opening fire, our national caveats, then that's life. Something is going to go wrong. That's just the chance, friction, uncertainty of war. And a lot of times our mistakes are our own. Just simply, logistics is hard to get somewhere, or command and control doesn't work. So I will hold myself back from that emotional, as Ian said yesterday, that's a sort of visceral feeling of, this is inconvenient for what we wanted to do, and just say, righto, it's what it is. Let's now fix what we can, if we can. Your questions, if I could. Perhaps those who have not asked a question before, this might be your big moment. Question just here. Thank you. Just in the centre here. So let us know who you are, and if your question is directed to one or more panellists, which one you're wanting to speak with.
Hi, Dan Lee, Australian Army. My question is to the Command Sergeant Major. So, in your opinion, do you think it would be useful to have more education for politicians, the media, and the public with regards to, as was mentioned, the visceral realities of war that soldiers are exposed to at the coalface, in order to provide the context part of ethics? So I guess an example would be, if, say, for instance, someone during a contact cuts off someone's hand, in order to be able to identify them later on. In isolation, that's obviously, well, seemingly obviously a war crime and unethical. If, I guess you had the context of what the situation was on the ground and the flow-on effects that may have been being considered, such as if that person's not positively identified, then perhaps more people have to come back in order to accomplish that task, which means there's more risk of civilian casualties, more risk of own force casualties. In order to then inform government and the public about how they judge whether something's ethical or not, or whether they make the decision to put ADF into that position at all.
Cool. Good question. I think we've got to be very careful that we don't blur the lines between politics and what the army, what the Defence Force does. You know, we have got a couple of members now, member for Canning. There's a few members that are sort of climbing their way in the political sphere. But I'm very, very mindful as a senior soldier that we've got to be careful we don't blur the lines between. You know, how many hours in a day would you know, to inform the political machine in Canberra of what, you know, Brigadier Field and the 3rd Brigade is doing? You know, that's why we have a leadership, you know, a senior leadership. That's their job, you know, at the lower levels. So I think the mixture in regards to the information flow, it's way above my pay grade in regards to the information flow to the political leadership. But that's for the senior leadership element of the Defence Force to keep them informed. And when situations unfold, like the incident that you mentioned, that's for the leadership of the Defence Force. You know, Chief of Army, Chief of Defence Force, to inform the political masters of what's transpired, give them context. So I don't think you could cover off on specific ethical issues and, you know, have a specific issue and then just lay it all out and have everyone have an opinion. That's why we have a chain of command. That's why we have, you know, leadership, so they can inform the political masters. So I think that'd be my answer. I think that's a good, safe political answer, considering I am sitting in here for a political person. So, but I'm not very political. I'm a soldier. Sir, any points?
So Colin S. Gray talks about government set policy, and Defence Forces do operations very well, but strategy is lacking. And so his view is, and I think we can take something from this, is that there needs to be a strategy bridge, and that is actually best developed by the well-trained military professionals who think and live strategy and should be in that space. So I'm of the view that rather than wish someone would change myself. So essentially I see it as our responsibility as the Australian Defence Force to build that strategy bridge between what we do great operations, there's policy, white paper, but actually what is Australia's strategy in between, that's for us to define as ADF professionals for people who are very busy and essentially people doing good work as our political leaders. But our responsibility is as professionals to give that strategic advice to our senior leadership.
Does those strategic advice sometimes include that this is ethically on the edge?
So if we go back to our values, courage, so courage is physical and moral. And I'm sure that the senior leadership of the Australian military senior leadership have shown a lot of moral courage over the century since Federation. So yeah, absolutely. And I think, in fact, the further you get away from the number one rifleman in contact, the less it is physical courage, more it is moral courage. And a lot of that goes back to your original question, Tom. It is how is your relationship shaped with the people that you work for and who work for you, and they need to be open relationships so you actually can have those discussions and lay out and say, look, there's going to be times when our conversation is going to be difficult. I foresee these things, and basically so that people listen to each other and allow people to share ideas.
Sorry, as a lawyer, I just can't help myself to respond to the war crime point. A war crime is a
Potential.
war crime. Sorry.
Potential.
The potential war crime. No, but on the face value, when we're talking about Geneva Conventions and we're talking about desecration of dead bodies, and it's a very slippery slope if you start justifying the cutting off of hands. It's a very slippery slope then the cutting off of heads, the mutilation of genitals, all sorts of other things that follow. So I think we have to be very clear that there are laws defined for a reason, and the civility we've discussed over the last day and a half. Once you, I think it was Major General McNairn who said that it's a slippery slope that without ethics you begin the descent into barbarism, and I think that those laws have stood the test of time for a reason.
So Tara, you can blow his head off with a round, but you can't take it off with a knife.
Right. Well, killing somebody is not illegal. You mean taking his head off? Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
So in other words,
Yes,
isn't it a little bit fine? So that if a weapon that decapitates someone, that's all right. But if they're dead for whatever reason, cutting their head off, that's not all right.
So once they're dead, cutting their head off is not all right.
Okay, so what's the deciding factor? That they are dead, and any
It's about
touching
respect for this dead person. I mean, you treat them as in the way that you would want your own soldiers treated when killed.
So you treat them better when they're dead than when they're alive?
Well, it's the paradox, isn't it, of the right to kill and the right to use kinetic force. I mean, you have that right, but you don't have the right then to not treat that person with dignity. And you would want your dead to be treated with dignity, and you treat the enemy with the same degree of dignity that you treat your own dead. And they're entitled to a burial, they're entitled to be returned to their families, have their bodies repatriated to their home.
Because it's a principle, they're dead, they're no longer in the fight.
Correct.
And therefore, any touching them anymore is a bad thing.
Well, yes, that's one way of putting it. Yeah. But I think it's a well-tested and understood principle about human dignity, essentially, and that's got to be at the core of this ethics discussion as well.
Of course. Other questions? There's one. Thank you.
Mark Pearson, Career Management, Australian Army. Tara before touched upon how do the two panellists engage in answering the sticky questions, and from a career management point of view, the Sergeant Major has covered off on the discipline side of the issue. In influencing and shaping behaviour at the younger ages, for example, as a career manager, a number of people in my portfolio, people are allowed to make mistakes, and the only way we get better experienced people is if we allow them to make those mistakes. But for example, in the example of sleeping with other soldiers' wives or husbands, or in the example of using defence housing and renting it out on Airbnb, those are a number of contemporary issues that we face at the moment. And if there's not the evidence there to charge them through the Discipline Act, there is also the administrative chain, so we give them a notice to show cause as to they're not sticking with the principles of the organisation. I'm just interested in the Brigadier's view as if, are we using the administrative line to help influence and shape our young soldiers and officers?
Is that are we using? Was that? Oh, yeah. Yes. Definitely. So we had a case recently where a soldier was assaulted, and her father rang a friend. He had nothing to do with the military. He rang a friend and said, "I'm going to go to Townsville. This has happened to my daughter. What will happen?" And that person, who's a serving ADF person in another service, said, "They will wrap around you and your family. You'll be shocked by the systems and processes they have in place to support your daughter." So indeed that was the case, and so he told me that story subsequently, and we just essentially go into action. So Army Incident Management System. If there is something untoward, then SEMPRO get involved. Comcare get involved. We were dealing with the civil police. We're dealing with headquarters above us. So essentially, there is an entire framework which will support people. As you're probably aware, so as soon as something happens, a fact finding occurs, the new name for the quick assessment, and we will establish the facts. Now, from there will be a recommendation. It could be the Defence Force Discipline Act, but the Defence Force Discipline Act is old, 1985, 1982. So it actually doesn't recognise modern communications, for example. So it's not entirely useful unless it is a clear-cut service discipline. So unauthorised discharge for a weapon, absent without leave. For other things, you can use the administration as you suggested, and then there's a range of options for commanders, and the administration process is really the partnership between the career management agencies, the officers or the soldiers and our organisations, and what it does, it allows a flexible response. But I'll go back to Exercise Hamel. Because Army's premier activity in terms of testing ourselves, or we close down all our courses, people come and become observer trainers, because that activity allows brigade commanders essentially to fail, and that's okay, then I think that what we're trying to do through that process is actually show people it is okay to make mistakes. And as you know, there is no escaping for our young people on social media, and all cameras are everywhere, and so essentially people are getting picked up for things that might have gone undetected previously, but they are able to be held to account through the process. Everything's recorded, and then we can make judgments based on whether they stay in the Army from that, and they have a progress on their career for later on. But yes, so my answer is yes.
So just a quick one to end. Is the Army more ethically accountable now than it was 10 years ago?
I get all the good questions. Yes, I believe it is.
And how could it become more ethically accountable?
Seminars like this. I think we've still got a bit of a way to go on the journey with the education. You know, like I said in my presentation, I think from a soldier's very basic point of view, it's the right and wrong decision. And, you know, how you've been brought up, your influences before you put this uniform on, that will hold you in good stead. Well, you know, we're not a perfect organisation. We're, you know, as the boss was saying, we're a reflection of society, and we do get individuals that probably don't fit the requirements for service. But to answer your question, I think we're in a good ethical spot. We really are.
Well, that's a good place, I think, to finish for lunch. Would you please thank our panellists?